when you listen those words? Do you think we will rise as a community, like African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, Caucasians? Can we rise as a community together? What do you want to say?
I think it just speaks to the perseverance and like the kind of spirit that people of color and also people who are disenfranchised have, because you don't have a choice but to allow that spirit to rise if you want to be able to like have hope and wake up in the morning. So I think like it just speaks to that, and I think like it's also interesting some of the natural resources that she comments on, because you always think about the fact that like she talks about oil wells and things like that, and those types of natural resources have been used to exploit people of color all across the world. So I think like it just combines those two ideas and really kind of hits home for people who can relate to that message.
Right. I haven't thought about the poem from that perspective, and I think it's awesome. Yeah. We have another poem we want to share. Do you want that?
Yeah. So this poem, it was introduced to me by a teacher when I was in high school, when I was struggling with math. So although the poem has a different connotation, it related, and it's always been with me since she gave it to me. And this is also the poem I found out later that Nelson Mandela, while he was in prison for 30 years, he kept with him and he read every day and gave him the power to continue. And it's just a really beautiful poem, and so I just want to read it to you, and maybe you can tell me like what you think about it. It's called Invictus. You heard of it? Yeah. And it goes like this. Out of the night that covers me, black as a pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstances, I have not wings nor cry out loud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head's bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade. And yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my faith. I am the captain of my soul.
Hey. Who wants to share? People who have not speak before. Yeah. Remember, this is a safe place. You can say whatever you want, and I'll be right.
Well, I'll say that writings are always very inspirational, and sometimes there are writings that can allow you to move on when you have a situation a circumstance where you don't know what to do. Sometimes reading poems, like Nelson Mandela, that was a poem that he read every morning when he was in prison, and he said that's what kept me going to be in prison all those years. So it's very important, like the spoken word. And I think even within the African American community, you have the oral word from when they were slaves in the plantations. It was the oral communication that kept them going, and even after that, so it has always been a symbolism within the African American community, the spoken words and the oral communications that they had. So it's always very interesting how these type of things can keep even a community and people going in circumstances of terror and when you're afraid and stuff like that.
It's just like
Do
music.
anyone knows a civil rights song? Just in case, like now that he talks about oral.
I shall overcome.
Yeah, I shall overcome. Anyone knows? Like last couple of weeks, I was organizing a rally, and they were singing this song like, "Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. God's gonna trouble the water." You know, so that's cultural contribution.
Girl, now you better stop playing, man.
that keeps cultures alive, right? So we need to make songs and poems for our movement. So
music
everybody,
is
if you write,
the solution to
sing,
the press.
anything. Okay.
You had a comment, Paula?
Huh?
You had a comment from that table?
Who?
No, I was saying that music is the solution and the medicine to the oppressed.
Yeah.
Tupac said it too.
Oh, what?
We need more music, more poetry for our movement, you know.
That's why they're having a lot of poetry tonight. They're during the last session. They have a talent contest where they're having they have I think 13 poets.
And just to mention something about written words and written literature, it's very interesting. Just so because I'm sure that many of you are not aware of this, but in Arizona, there's this city called Tucson, and currently, or last year, the Board of Education passed a law that banned all ethnic studies that were either Mexican or Latin American. And this is a community that has like the majority of the people are of Mexican descent, and the Board of Education like banned all forms of ethnic studies. And what they did is that they forbid 500 books, even Shakespeare, some of Shakespeare's books, because they talk about anger or bitterness or rebellion or anything that has to do with struggle. And like the poem that I just read to you, you can't read that anymore over there because you can get in trouble. And this is just something that perhaps the African American community for decades they fought to end this, but now we're seeing it again, but against another community. And this is something that's happening right now in Arizona, where the students, they're being forbidden from learning about their past. And it's not that when you learn about the past, you become bitter. That's not true. But you become more aware of not only who you are, but of what you can contribute to society. And I think that what's happening in Tucson and what is happening in like Alabama, because they did it too in Alabama with the immigration law, in South Carolina, and in Kansas, and they want to do it in Utah. So these are like, it's going in other states where they want to like prohibit the Latino community from emerging stronger. They want to like, put them in here, like put them in another class. So it's very important because even in the writings, they're even being forbidden in these places from people to be able to learn about who they are or about where they come from. So just keep in mind that writing is very powerful, and sometimes it can be a threat to people.
Yeah.
Some sort of.
Yes.
And also, first of all, I apologize for being late. No one to introduce myself. My name is Margaret West. And I think that like what you were saying is very interesting, and I think like a lot of times like with the like human history, you look back on like people of color and like different ethnic groups all over the world that have used like oral tradition as a way to preserve history and like to be able to equalize knowledge, because regardless of if you can read, you can still memorize. And I think that like a lot of Western cultures, their values are placed on how well you can actually write and like process information that is like recorded and written. And like because of that different thought on like how knowledge is absorbed, it kind of like, I think oral tradition is seen as something that is a sign of ignorance rather than intelligence. So it becomes a view of like what is intelligent and how do you become intelligent and things like that. I think like being cognizant of knowing like what people's methods of like, I guess you could say suppression and oppression are, can really like make people take pride in oral tradition, because I think like as a culture now, like we have oral tradition, but we don't necessarily like take the pride in it that we could. Like we do talk about people like Tupac Shakur, and like that's oral tradition. Being able to spit is like an oral tradition, and I think like things we don't take pride in and like don't teach to our older generation. This is our oral tradition, because I think that we're kind of like, people kind of make us feel bad for our generation and like the things that we've done, because they see rap and hip hop sometimes as like a negative thing, which there is negative things about it, but there is a rich history, tradition, and other cultures have similar things too. So I think that's like an interesting thing, like all the things that we've been hearing about from the conference.
I think one of the most beautiful things that came out of one of the most beautiful contributions from the African American community is the oral tradition that came out of slavery, because they didn't know how to write and they didn't know how to like read, but they knew how to sing. And when you read, like, and I recommend you all to search on like literature books about African American literature books, not like Western written African American books. Check the oral writings that they had, and they're very beautiful, and they're very, very significant in what, because you can learn really about the history and the struggle during slavery and even after slavery. It's very, very beautiful.
Cedric, you want to say something, and we will take that last comment for now, so we can go ahead with the agenda.
Yes. It's not so much about oral tradition, but you have to look at it from a historical standpoint too. Latinos are being oppressed in Arizona and Alabama, and those were two of the worst states that were oppressing African Americans. Because like in Arizona, Martin Luther King Day,
Yeah.
was it was